They arrived with sirens, badges, and the absolute audacity to think they could cuff me, a retired state prosecutor, right here on my own land, a land I bought specifically to escape political theater and the kind of petty tyranny that wears a cheap power suit. If you think your HOA drama is bad, just wait until you hear how mine escalated from a nasty letter to a federal terrorism charge. It all started so quietly, like most nightmares do. My name is Elias Vance, but around these parts, folks just call me Eli. I served the great state of Wyoming for over 20 years as Chief Deputy Attorney General. 20 years of fighting corruption, organized crime, and truly dangerous people. That meant endless late nights, threats whispered over the phone, and the constant stress of knowing one small slip could cost a good man his life. So when I finally retired, my wife, Clara, and I were done with power games. We bought 50 acres out here in Elk Ridge County, built our ranch from the ground up, painted the barn a bold, beautiful turquoise, Clara's favorite color, a color of peace, we thought, and settled in for pure, unadulterated silence. Just cattle, chickens, and the wide open sky. That silence lasted about 6 months, until the Cedar Creek Estates HOA decided my turquoise barn was an affront to their rustic, neutral aesthetic. Now, let me be crystal clear. My ranch is not in their HOA. Never was, never signed a document, never paid a dime in dues. Their boundary line is a solid mile down the road. But that didn't stop the board president, a woman named Vivian Holloway, from trying to throw her weight around. Vivian was a piece of work, your textbook definition of HOA royalty, all platinum highlights, designer sunglasses, and a voice that could, quite literally, crack a windshield. She ran that HOA like a corporate dictatorship, and she hated anything she couldn't control, especially my peace. The letters started coming. Dozens of them, thick paper, red borders, citing non-existent livestock ordinance violations and demanding I repaint my barn to a standard earth tone palette. Then the fine started. $450 for a misplaced hay bale, $600 for unregistered fencing. They even sent me a bill for $1,000 for visual pollution. I just laughed, showed them a Clara, and tossed them into the wood stove. She's just warming up her engines, I told Clara, trying to sound calm, but that familiar knot of legal fury was already starting to twist in my gut. But Vivian wasn't just warming up. She was preparing for war, and I soon learned why. Turns out, Cedar Creek Estates was actively trying to annex the land next to mine for an expansion, and they needed my ranch to complete a certain zoning map. My independent land, my non-conforming turquoise barn, stood in the way of her grand vision and her profit margins. That's when the petty fines stopped and the real harassment began. One afternoon, I caught her security chair, a man in a borrowed golf cart named Mitch, leaning against my main gate, furiously scribbling in a little notebook, taking photos of my prize-winning longhorn Betsy. I just waved and smiled. Another day, Mitch was actually flying a drone low over my cattle, trying to scare them. I called Sheriff Jake Harrison, who was just starting his term, and he paid Mitch a friendly visit. That stopped the drone, but the game was changing. You don't get into politics for 2 decades without learning to recognize the scent of a brewing scheme. And this one smelled like cheap desperation mixed with absolute arrogance. A few days later, the official-looking notices started arriving from the Cedar Creek Compliance Task Force, complete with seals that looked like they were drawn by a middle schooler. I didn't respond, didn't send a cease and desist. I just waited. I figured I'd give them enough rope to hang themselves with. I was a prosecutor. I knew how to build a case, and right now, every move they made was just more evidence for me. That morning, I was fixing a broken fence post down by the property line when I heard it. The distinct sound of multiple engines revving, the crunch of gravel under heavy tires. 2 black SUVs and an unmarked Crown Victoria, like old police cars, came flying down my private driveway. They hadn't just trespassed, they were staging a full-on, ridiculous theater of authority. The doors flew open, and 3 figures jumped out, wearing cheap black vests and flashing dashboard lights. One of them, a big guy with a bad shave and a plastic-looking badge clipped to his vest, pointed a flashlight at me and yelled, "You're under arrest. Failure to comply with community code and resisting lawful HOA jurisdiction." I stood there, hands up, feeling that dry Wyoming wind. My heart wasn't pounding from fear, but from a familiar, bitter fury. Clara came running out onto the porch, yelling, "Eli, what's happening? Stay inside, honey," I shouted back. Then I looked the imposter dead in the eye and asked, "Who exactly sent you, son?" "HOA Compliance Task Force. This is your final warning, criminal," he barked, reaching for a set of plastic handcuffs. I narrowed my eyes and took a step toward him. "You boys are either truly brave or profoundly stupid," I said, my voice dropping to that cold, deliberate tone I used in the courtroom when I knew I had a guaranteed win. "Because right now, you are trespassing, impersonating an officer of the law, and threatening illegal detainment. And I should know, because I spent 20 years writing the very statutes you are currently violating." The man hesitated. I saw a flicker of confusion, maybe fear, in his eyes. Just as his partner moved to grab my arm, we heard an engine roar. A black GMC Yukon with official county plates came skidding onto the gravel, kicking up a rooster tail of dust. The door flew open, and out stepped Sheriff Jake Harrison, a man I mentored years ago, a man who knows exactly who I am. He didn't rush. He just walked right up to the fake officer, badge gleaming in the morning sun. "Drop the cuffs," Jake said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of real authority. "You're performing what now?" The idiot tried to sound official. "Sir, this is a lawful compliance arrest." Jake snatched the plastic badge off his vest. He examined the cheap seal, turning it over in his hand, a wry smirk on his face. "Cedar Creek Estates, huh? Looks like a prize you'd get out of a box of cereal. This is not laminated, son. You're all under arrest for impersonating a peace officer." The man who tried to cuff me dropped the plastic restraints instantly. Suddenly, their little HOA stunt had gone sideways in the most catastrophic way. Claire stepped out with her phone, recording. Meanwhile, I saw Vivian Holloway watching the whole thing from her silver Mercedes at the end of my road. When our eyes met, she didn't blink, didn't flinch. She just started her car and drove away. But she made one mistake. She forgot that a man who spent his life prosecuting criminals never, ever forgets an enemy. The investigation started that afternoon. Sheriff Jake had the three men cuffed, their rights read, and the fake vehicles impounded within the hour. Turns out the three were low-level security guards hired by a shell committee Vivian had created, using HOA funds to rent the vehicles and buy the cheap gear. We had them dead to rights. But the real war began when the news broke. Retired AG nearly arrested by fake HOA cops. The firestorm was immediate. Vivian tried to deny it, but Sheriff Jake released the dashcam footage and the photos of the ridiculous plastic badges. Her denial crumbled, and the homeowners in her actual HOA started demanding a full audit and a board recall. Then came the escalation. One morning, I found hundreds of flyers scattered near the stream. Photoshopped images of me, calling me a fraudulent landlord and community terrorist. They had crossed on my private property in the dead of night to dump propaganda. It was no longer a dispute. It was clear-cut defamation and harassment. I called Sarah Keene, my brilliant former deputy, who now ran her own powerhouse firm. She listened to the whole story, her silence on the other end of the line more terrifying than any shouting. "Eli," she finally said, her voice tight, "this is not a civil boundary dispute. This is a criminal conspiracy, at a minimum. We are not filing a cease and desist. We are filing a lawsuit that dismantles her entire operation." I gave her the green light. But while Sarah worked the civil courts, I was focused on the criminal side. I sat down with Jake, pulling out old files. "Jake, who does Vivian know? Who does she use for muscle?" Sheriff Jake confirmed what I suspected. Vivian had reached out to a man named Victor Klein, a notorious political fixer I put away 10 years ago for embezzlement and racketeering. Victor had gotten out on early parole, a clerical error, a sickening twist of fate. Victor Klein wasn't here to smear. He was here to destroy. He saw me as the man who stole a decade of his life, and Vivian saw him as the perfect weapon to reclaim her power and land. Sure enough, we found a military-grade tracker wired under my pickup truck, small and sophisticated. I used my old contacts, traced the signal, and found the receiver hidden on a ridge. They were watching us constantly. Then came the vandalism. One night, a loud crash that sent me bolting out of bed. And there it was, my beautiful turquoise barn, the color Clara loved, spray-painted in thick black letters. "This is just the beginning," yell I. "Sell now." Clara broke down in the kitchen, sobbing into her hands. "I wanted peace, Eli. I wanted sunsets and silence. Why can't they just leave us alone?" I held her tight, staring out at the damage, a granite certainty hardening in my jaw. "Because we stood up, honey. And I made enemies in power who thought they could hide behind HOA bylaws and fake badges. But they forgot one thing. I may be retired, but I'm still the law." The final nail in Vivian's coffin came with the audit Sarah's team forced. They found that Vivian hadn't just been using HOA funds for dry cleaning and travel. She had funneled $25,000 to a shell corporation directly linked to Victor Klein. She was funding a felon to stalk and terrorize a private citizen, all to secure a zoning change. We filed a motion to dissolve the Cedar Creek HOA under emergency judicial review, citing fraud, misuse of funds, and risk to public safety. The clock was ticking, but the final act of terror was purely Victor's. One morning, a plain brown box, like an Amazon delivery, sat innocently on my porch. No return address. Clara asked if I ordered anything. The hair on my neck stood up. "No," I whispered. We backed away immediately. I called Jake. 20 minutes later, the bomb squad arrived in full gear, sealed off the ranch, and used a robot to drag the package out to the edge of the pasture. The moment the robot opened it, boom, a loud, fiery blast shattered the early morning silence. The message was clear. They didn't just want me gone, they wanted me dead. 2 nights before the court hearing, Clara and I were on the porch, watching the sunset, knowing it might be our last quiet one. Then, a sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway. The window rolled down slowly. "Hey, Eli," a voice called out, chillingly casual, arrogant. "Remember me?" It was Victor Klein. He wasn't hiding anymore. He had the nerve to smile, like this was a twisted social call. I felt Clara's grip tighten on my arm, but I gently pushed her back toward the door. I stepped forward, voice cold and steady. "You are trespassing, Victor. Take one more step out of that car, and you're leaving a body bag or an ambulance." Victor just smirked, a classic, punchable look. "Relax, Eli. The bomb? You can't prove that. It's just a crazy old man's delusion." "Actually," I countered, stepping closer so he could see the absolute certainty in my eyes. "The casing survived the blast. The FBI matched your prints this morning. For a professional, Victor, you made a sloppy attempt at murder. That explosion just upgraded your charges to attempted domestic terrorism." I leaned in, my voice a low, hard rasp. "Here's what happens. You drive off this property right now and turn yourself in, or Jake will drag you out of that car and slap you with federal terrorism charges. Your parole is already revoked. You have no move left." He stared for one long, cold moment, his cockiness finally dissolving into raw fear. Then, slowly, he reversed the car, headlights sweeping across the ranch, and disappeared into the darkness. 2 days later, the courtroom was packed. Sarah was magnificent, laying out the entire criminal conspiracy. The fake badges, the wire transfers, the stalking, the bomb attempt. We played Victor's video threat for the court. The defense had nothing. Vivian Holloway was found guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and endangerment. 15 years in prison. Victor Klein was hit with federal charges and got 25 years without parole. The Cedar Creek HOA was permanently dissolved. We won. But more than that, we proved that you can't fake authority forever. 2 weeks later, life was peace. The fences were repaired. Clara was planting her sunflowers, choosing a new bright, unrepentant shade of blue for the barn. Sheriff Jake dropped by, not in uniform, but with a bottle of good bourbon. Then, one morning, Clara came in with her phone, eyes wide. "Eli, turn on the news." Breaking. New Wyoming HOA president found tied to criminal syndicate connected to Klein investigation. My eyes narrowed. So, it was bigger than one petty HOA queen. My fight had just uncovered a deep, interconnected network of corrupt community leaders and the criminals they hired to enforce their tyranny and manipulate land values. The DOJ task force called me later that day, asking me to assist as a witness and a consultant. I realized then that my ranch wasn't just my home. It was the firing line in a much larger fight for basic property rights and against petty authoritarianism. And I knew exactly what my retirement was going to look like now, fighting the good fight, one HOA bully at a time. I looked at Clara, and she just smiled, a look of profound peace and steely resolve. Folks, let me ask you, have you ever dealt with a situation where someone was hiding behind a title or a committee to exert real power? When is it right to stand up, and when is it smarter to walk away? If you fought for your property rights, I want to hear your story. Drop your story in the comments below and tell me, sometimes, does justice really have to wear a cowboy hat?